and also as part of the events that we have for TUS Pride Week across all our campuses. So, students might be wondering why we have Vanessa in every year. I think this is your 6th year speaking to us, I'm pretty sure. It could be 7th. It could be 7th year having a chat with us in the springtime for year 4s. But the reason that we have Vanessa in is because the content that we're kind of taking a look at is around sexuality and how can social care workers support people in their sexuality and in a healthy and respectful and inclusive way. And Vanessa is she's certainly my go-to person to talk about transgender and any kind of gender identity issues. Vanessa herself began the process of gender transition in 2007 after, living much of her life in what she describes as an inauthentic way. She then went on to do a foundation course in counseling in WIT. She followed that, as she was just saying, with her BA in psychology. She went to work for TENI, which is the Transgender Equality Network Ireland, which I've mentioned in lecture before, but I know Vanessa might be mentioning here across the next hour. She designed training and delivered training for them to hundreds of healthcare professionals, teachers, colleges, the Gardaí, and other bodies. During that time, she undertook a postgraduate degree in research with us here at TUS, and then she transitioned that into a PhD, which I'm delighted to say she was awarded last November. The first from the Department of Applied Social Sciences to graduate with a PhD. So lots of excitement there. Her thesis for the PhD focused on loss and grief experienced by adult trans women in Ireland and their families in the context of gender transition. And Vanessa is a member of the Loss and Grief Research Group at TUS. She is also the founder and executive officer of Gender Care, which you can find out more about at www.gendercare.ie. And that is a consultancy firm to support people and organizations who are looking at gender identity. She's also a member of WPATH, the World Professional Association of Transgender Healthcare, and its European counterpart, EPATH. So after all that, you're going to have nothing left to say. Tell us about yourself. And welcome to Pride Week, and welcome to PG6.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And yeah, it's a pity I can't see everybody. It's all I can see is yourself.
I know. Sorry.
But it's great to be here. And as I said earlier on, happy Pride to everybody for Pride Week. And yeah, I'm not sure whether it's 6 or 7 years that I've been coming to LIT, but certainly on my very first visit there, which you orchestrated, and thank you very much. You mentioned in my year afterwards, just wondering how ambiguous loss would have impacted gender identity. And that kind of set off wheels in motion.
Yeah.
And that led to years of stress. But it was a great experience of, I suppose, like my favorite, my most memorable experience wasn't finishing my thesis. It was teaching. It was doing the tutorials in there for social psychology and stress psychology. That was my most memorable experience in LIT at that time.
Yeah.
Of course, like in terms of graduating with my 2 sons by my side was something I'll never forget for the rest of my life. You know, especially when you're talking about family and you're talking about ambiguous loss and gender transition. And there are 2 things, Jennifer, that, like, you know, are very much directly related to gender transition. I never thought in a million years I'd be teaching in the gender that I identify in as female to a class that the lecture was not trans related. It was social psychology and stress. So that was extremely meaningful in terms of what that was like for me and for the students. And then coming back years later and graduating on the ground of the All-Ireland champions again, and with my 2 sons by my side with a PhD, you know. So again, it kind of brings in the gender identity aspect of my life, and in terms of how I suppose you'd see lots of negative information, and I'm very aware of this. A lot of negative information in social media and the media in terms of transgender people, and there's so much polarized views out there that can be problematic sometimes to find a space in between that. But I think, just to say that, you can have a very enriched and authentic and full life when you gender transition. So it's not negative. It's not all negative. I think really kind of keep away from that noise at times and just channel out your own pathway. Your own pathway is your own individual pathway, and make that look, make it look like what suits you best, not what suits somebody on YouTube best, or somebody that you see on social media. Make it look like what you want to make it. It's your life. It's not just your gender identity. You have loads of aspects to your life, just despite your gender identity as well. So make it look like what you want it to be.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you, and that's probably the soundest advice for all kinds of aspects of life. But it's great to hear it kind of in the context of gender transition. And I should probably reverse back just slightly and say that you can't see people because we've set this up as a webinar, but people who are here in the webinar, if you have questions, you can type it in the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. And it would be really great if people did pop in with questions for us, because we have the opportunity to kind of broaden the discussion in that way. I might start us off and start with kind of very basics, so that we're really covering it for everybody, people who know a lot about transgender stuff and people who know very little, right? What is transgender? What does that mean? What does that mean?
So I suppose really to kind of look at definitions, I suppose, really. So for transgender people, it's having a gender identity that differs to varying degrees from the sex that you were assigned at birth. So different transgender people, so transgender is an umbrella term, number one. So there's lots of different, I mean, there's something like 80 different variations or definitions in terms of transgender people. I prefer not to use an umbrella. I prefer to use a big oak tree that has all the different branches and all the different twigs and the leaves and the flowers. As much as the big oak tree, the trunk itself is the transgender aspects, and then the branches and the leaves and the twigs and the tree and the flowers are just a different variations then of transgender identities. So I think, that sometimes loses people in terms of all the definitions, and I don't know half of them. I don't think I know a quarter of them. Some people can identify in various different ways, and again, that can lose people at times too. But I think in terms of the trainings that I would provide, I kind of break it down and try to kind of put it in context, make more sense out of it, speak about it in simple language. I mean, the main thing in terms of training is not to confuse people. It's to ensure that they feel more empowered in terms of the language when they're working with transgender people in the future. So don't let the variations confuse you. I suppose it's just that people do have their gender identity does differ from the sex they were assigned at birth. So just keep that simple in terms of where that is. And some people need different pathways. Some people might want to express their gender a little bit different at different times. Some people might want to socially transition in some ways in terms of new hairstyles or maybe makeup or present in a more masculine way. Some people may want to, may feel that they need to explore medical aspects to change parts of their physical self. Some people just might want to legally change details of themselves. So again, you can vary in different ways. And again, as I would say, just to make sure that suits yourself.
Okay. Okay. So a person who is trans is someone who, because of kind of the physically observable body characteristics at birth, was assigned to be either male or female, and our medical systems and like most of us across human history have kind of dealt in that binary place of you're either a man or a woman, with maybe a little bit of room for people that we might describe as intersex, or who might have characteristics of both masculine and feminine. But the transgender person, at somewhere along their lives, says, I may have been assigned this, but boy, I don't feel it. And I want to kind of live differently. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I think again you bring in the generation aspect, and old ones like myself, I suppose, in terms of growing up in a way that was confusing and conflicting for me and for other people who are of the older generation, with no language to describe that. So not being able to understand what is happening for me where I don't identify as a boy or a male, but understanding that if I express feminine behavior, I receive these punishments, not physical punishments, but psychological punishments. Whereas if I behave in a more masculine way, I have these rewards, and I'm being brought off on spins with my dad or whatever that is for me. And then to kind of fit yourself or cocoon yourself into this facade, which can remain with you for many years or many decades, just to please people initially, and then feel that it's the only way you can live because of the fear of gender transition. So it's not an easy thing to gender transition, and I'd never like to portray it as easy. For some people, there's much more supports now. So you just looking at older people and how we would have understood it, we wouldn't have understood it. And then you're coming to an area now where there's much more information about that. And there's less older people transitioning, there's more younger people transitioning. So in terms of, there's more information about there's more language out there, there's more understanding, it's on the media more, even sometimes it's negative, you can get an insight into it. And there's more support out there, there's LGBT groups, there's trans groups, there's groups in colleges, there's groups in schools, there's rainbow weeks, there's pride weeks. So people have a better handle on it. So the statistics now are there's much more younger people coming out as transgender than older people. So I think that's a positive. That's not a negative. That's a positive.
Yeah. Okay. And I think, hopefully we'll get to that idea of, because I know that we have, loads and loads of social care practitioners here in the audience with us. And I'd really like them to hear from you about like, what are the best ways that a social care practitioner could support people who might be like starting to discover or explore that for themselves. But I suppose if it's okay to take it to your story for a minute, you, to put it bluntly, kind of lived your life as a man for a good section, more than half your life so far, right?
43 years to be precise. So I suppose I lived in a male role for 40. Well, I mean, I don't know if you count the 3 or 4 or 5 years as a child before I became aware that I needed to not express the gender that I felt I was. But yeah, certainly for 4 decades anyway. Performed. Yeah. I performed the male role. And sure, it was very confusing for me. I just didn't have, just as I said, I really didn't know what the heck was going on for me. But again, when you develop facades, within your own family, and then you live in that role for decades, when you come out, it's much more harder for family to understand that, because they think, hold on a minute, we never knew this before. And often there's a negative reaction for family members thinking, no, that's not you. You're not like that. And sometimes it might come across as what people say is transphobic, but sometimes, and quite often, it is a lack of understanding in terms, and can be quite traumatic for family members as well, thinking, hold on a minute, I always knew you as male, or I always knew you as female. How does that fit into the family plan? How does that fit into the family script? How does it fit into the family form? You're now our oldest sister. You're not my older brother anymore. So you can cause a lot of confusion. So as much as the transgender person might have felt relieved, and for me, I was very much relieved. I've come out with this after all these years of internalizing this, and then for family members to think, have you lost your mind? So again, it can cause that really bitterness, and it can cause the conflict and fragmentation in terms of families. So, and certainly that's where I was coming from in terms of my work, my previous work before I joined TENI, because I did have a history of developing support groups before that in Waterford, I'm very proud to say. And then I went into my role as TENI, which I was there for 11 years. And now as gender care. So, and then more than anything, then the research that I done in terms of exploring the experiences of adult transgender women and families of adult transgender women. So again, to have a look at both aspects of how families are experiencing this loss and grief, and then how adult transgender women are also experiencing this loss and grief. So I think, in terms of, my own experiences of growing up with this conflict around who am I? This is not who I am. Everybody else thinking, yes, this is who you are. And I'm thinking, no, this is not who I am. And then when you finally, have the courage or the madness to finally think, you know what, I just can't keep doing this anymore. Can't keep performing this anymore. If you're on stage, you perform for 2 hours, or if you're an actor and actress, you go and perform at certain parts. But to sustain and to maintain that performance, all of your waking day is very draining. Very draining to kind of think, oh, Jesus Christ, I'm drained performing this for 4 decades.
Sure.
So I'm delighted, I suppose, to see more and more younger people exploring. Not all of them will go on to gender transition, but they might explore it and say, well, what does this look like for me? And yeah, this is right for me, or this is wrong for me, or younger people would have experienced that conflict at very young age, and really that they would voice that they can't live in the gender that they got. And sure, look, we have Dr. Google out there now, so parents are often on it and thinking, oh, okay. But at the same time, as much as there's more information out there, and it's great, I find that sometimes with the parents of younger children who go on Dr. Google, and they are traumatized because they see suicide rates of children, and it's God Almighty. Honestly, I feel it in my heart. Even talking about it now, that all the conversations I've had with family members and parents, especially, who are really struggling when they're thinking, oh, is my child going to live? What kind of a threat is to my child? And and then they're looking for these medical interventions, and it's like, just slow down and just talk about it, and just slow down and just tell me more about it.
Yeah. Okay. And we may in the hour kind of talk about the rise in transitioning and the rise in medical interventions for transitions and how much more common that is these days. But you touched on suicide, and you touched on the stressors and the pressure that somebody who's performing, who's hiding an aspect of themselves. Can you talk a little bit more about that, about kind of the supports that somebody who is exploring gender, or who is gender questioning, or who is in fact really holding back or repressing something? What are the kind of psychological and emotional and mental health and well-being risks inherent in that? I think that's important for social care students to hear.
Yeah, I mean, it's, and again, as I mentioned, the definition, it's varying degrees. Some people might experience, gender dysphoria, but not very high. Other people might experience it real severe.
Just give us a one-sentence definition of gender dysphoria.
So gender dysphoria, I suppose, going back, is that experience that you might have in terms of feeling that you don't identify in the gender that you were assigned at birth. So some people would experience in terms of their body and presenting in their body, in terms of you might experience your gender yourself. You might explore that for yourself in terms of, as a psychologist in Belgium said last week to me, coming in. You're coming in, so you're kind of understanding it. And then it's the coming out piece, which is again you're telling other people, and then you're starting to express that.
Okay.
So again, it gives varying amount of challenges, but in terms of defining gender dysphoria is just a level of stress and anxiety. You have on the other side, you have euphoria, feel euphoric about a certain aspect of life. In terms of dysphoria, it's the opposite of that. It's feeling pained in terms of, it's very challenging for me, really difficult. It's not even challenging. It's just difficult for me to live in the gender that I'm feeling. It's really painful for me. It's hard for me to function. It's hard for me to motivate myself, and I'm bringing it back to my gender. So where does someone go with that? And I think really there is support lines, there's helplines, there's local LGBT organizations. There's TENI, Transgender Equality Network Ireland. They have support groups in various locations in Ireland. You have the wonderful GOSH. I was only talking to Patrick McElliott a few weeks ago. And you have that wonderful organization there. And there's a support group in Limerick, of course, as well. And there is, as I mentioned about family, there's family support groups. So there's family support groups in various locations. Again, if you want to link in with TENI's Family Education and Support Officer, Hannah Solly, Hannah can let you know in terms of what supports are available for families as well. So again, like the supports for transgender people are vital, but also the supports for family members of transgender people are also vital. Because it's kind of like a twin track approach in terms of how did the family manage the initial shock? How does the transgender person deal with the family dealing with the shock, and to have the opportunity to explore the gender identity more, have the opportunity to see how they might start to explore showing their gender identity to the world. And that's, Jennifer, the hardest piece, and that's a part for social care workers, again, then, who might be able to support transgender people along the way in terms of, I suppose, locating different services. So in terms of, when a transgender person comes out, whether they be 60 or 70 years of age or 17 or 18 years of age, there's different aspects that can be helpful for them. So just to kind of sit down and see, what kind of aspects of your life can we help with? Yeah. So in terms of, I want to change my legal details in terms of my bank account. I want to change my library card. I'm applying for CAO, and I want to know how do I apply for that, but I want to apply for that in my own gender. I've done my junior cert and my leaving cert in this previous name, but I want to have them updated now into the name that I identify now. And this, for the social care workers, say, okay, I'll explore that for you. And then, certainly connecting with myself in gender care, you have TENI, you have the LGBT organizations. So the social care worker can, I suppose, alleviate some of that stress, to lift the load, I would call it, I suppose, to lift that load of all them responsibility, bank account and CEO and telling families and telling friends and going shopping, the basic things of going into Pennies and buying the clothes of the gender that you identify in is a very difficult thing for some people. And trans women seem to have more difficulty in that than trans men have, or non-binary people. So non-binary people have various other challenges, and one is having no validation in terms of their gender identity. So I think that's another massive problem. So in terms of, the different people who would fall under this umbrella or part of this oak tree, they have different challenges. So in terms of social care worker, to try and lift the load, just to try and take some of them pressures off you.
Yeah.
And you know what's fantastic, and I don't know if you have it in Limerick now, I'm sure you have it, is social prescribing. Do you have social prescribing up in?
Don't think we do yet.
Yes.
But hopefully it's so funny. I was just on a call with a colleague in the Netherlands where there is lots and lots and lots of social prescribing. And I know you worked a little bit in social prescribing, and you might give us a sense of what that's like. But it does sound like such a wonderful kind of just approach to healthcare and wellness, and not having to go to a pharmacy or a surgery every single time that there's something you need support with. Do you want to just give us a little thumbnail sketch of social prescribing so that everybody knows?
I mean, social prescribing is a model that was developed in the UK, and it's a model, I suppose, that does what I just said in terms of signposting, finding services to I suppose help people alleviate some of the stress and anxiety they're feeling. And it came about because people were continuously attending their GP in the UK with anxieties and stresses, and were on medication for anxiety and stressors, but they kept coming back, kept repeat prescriptions, and doctors started speaking about this. How can a lot of this seems to be isolation. A lot of the stress is emanating from the isolation that people have. So they started piloting a social prescriber that's not medical related, in terms of sitting down with the person and exploring what their life is like at the moment. And I would often hear, I loved the job in social prescribing, and people would tell you, I used to love doing this. And I was thinking, well, why don't you do it now?
Yeah.
And I said, and I'd have a list of stuff then. And I said, well, they'd say, what do I need to do? You don't need to do anything. You just need to come back maybe next week, and I'll put you in for an appointment at 3:00 next Thursday. And they come back, and I have all this literature in terms of, there's some information about walking groups. Here's some information about snooker groups. There was one lady, and most of actually the people who would come for appointments for social prescribers were over 70 years of age. So again, you can imagine the isolation
and the loneliness.
Yeah. And there was one woman, and all she wanted to do was play 30s.
Do
you know the card game called 30s?
No.
Okay.
They have 25 down here, I think. I think it's called 25. So maybe it's the same thing, except we have fewer numbers in Clare.
You're cheaper. It's cheaper. Yeah.
Probably. Sorry, Clare people.
No, so but I think that's just a snapshot of what social prescribing is. So kind of putting that in relation to transgender people who would maybe be supported by social care workers, is to try and even to signpost them to a social prescriber, or sit down and kind of have a conversation. What is giving you the highest amount of stress at the moment? And if it is a suicide related, of course, Pieta House or other regional organizations that support people, to link them in with supports. And I suppose, for myself, as you mentioned, that I came out at 2007 when I was 43 years of age, and I was married and had 2 children at that time, young children, 7 and 11. And I was suicidal. I mean, there was no doubt I was suicidal. I was really struggling with this. And I would have spent lots of times in churches praying for statues to come down and just listen to me. Or even the priest who was walking in the aisle to stop walking up and down the aisle and come over and say, look, are you all right? You're in front here. But it never happened. And I got my answer in a library, not in a book because there was no books there. But on the way out, there was a big sign. And this is the importance of things, of that visibility. I think visibility is so important. But on the way out of that library, there was this big poster, an A5 poster with gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender, written in big words and a phone number on the end of it. And I thought, what? Jesus, in the library? Because I had so much internalized transphobia myself. It was just like, really, in the library?
Okay.
I took down the number and I rang it. And I got an answer first time. And I met the person who took the phone call, and she linked me in to a psychotherapist at that time. And I just needed to talk about my experience and you know, I suppose that feeling of isolation then and stress and expectations of rejection then started to alleviate over the years the more I spoke about my experience and networked them with other people in similar situations to myself.
Yeah.
And I suppose I developed coping strategies to be able to help myself survive and not just survive, but also to thrive.
Yeah. But like, I hear you in that, in your both your personal story and kind of your professional discussions there, talking about a person, and for us it might be a social care professional. For you it was probably that psychotherapist. You had wanted it to be the priest or just somebody to notice, just like someone to kind of accompany you or to walk alongside you, not to solve your problems, not to give loads of advice, not to chastise you or correct you, but just almost kind of go, I don't know, and I'm not really sure, but I'll come along with you and we'll see what we can find out together. That's the valuable thing that we can kind of offer people.
Absolutely. I think, you know, I always have said that social care workers have a vital role to play in transgender people's someone said don't be using the word journey, but I can't think of another
Journey.
word.
I know. I hope I didn't say journey.
I always say journey, but it's not just, you know, it's also family members. You know, how can you support a family member? You know, how can you support a young person? I mean, there's so many different components to it. And sure, look, families, you bring in the family itself, the brothers and the sisters and the mother, and then you bring in the extended family, then you bring in the extended family, and then you bring in the friends, and then you bring in the school, and then you bring in the employment. And, you know, there's so many different aspects to contemplate. And then you have the healthcare aspect, of course, and then that brings in further challenges.
Yeah. So okay. So let me ask you about that. So let's pretend that there's somebody who's listening here with us today. And remember too, guys, if you have questions or comments or anything, you can put them in the Q&A section. They come up, only Vanessa and I will see them, and they also come up anonymously. So, you know, feel free to ask the questions. Don't be shy. They're in the Q&A, and also in the chat function. I've just put in just a couple of websites that might be of interest, and I see there were a couple of comments in there too, so we might get to them. Okay, somebody who's with us today is going to graduate in May. They're going to go out and they're going to get a job, and let's pretend they get a job at, I'm making this up now, Limerick Youth Service, and they are a youth worker, and they are approached by a young person. Let's say the young person is age 12. And the young person says to them, I really think I might be trans. I was assigned, the kids probably won't have this language around it, but you know, they tell me I'm a boy, but I don't feel that I'm a boy. I feel that I'm a girl. What opportunities are there, or what is generally in the healthcare path? Like, what happens with that child who's 12? And then we'll change this to 16 or 18. But what's the pathway for treatment, let's say, in Ireland currently?
Yeah, you always start with the hardest questions.
Sorry, I know. I just want to try to make the distinctions for everybody in here.
Yeah.
About that it's not just, oh, you're going to have an operation and medically transition tomorrow. That's not how it works, and perhaps not how it should work either.
Absolutely. I think for that 12-year-old, when you're having that conversation, I suppose first explore the situation, whether it's safe to tell the parents, whether it's safe to, do they feel comfortable telling the parents? Do the parents know? Certainly one of the factors that lead to the best outcomes is support from families.
Yeah.
So it's just really essential that we spend the time in supporting the family environment as well. And I hope I haven't just gone on and on about families for the last 40 minutes or so, but it is a factor.
Yeah.
Certainly the data really looks at the family support in this area.
Yeah.
So for that 12-year-old, just to make sure they have that, they have other supports. The GP is key in all of this, because the GP can make them referrals either to the local CAMHS teams.
Okay.
And then the CAMHS consultant then can make the necessary referrals. In terms of services in Ireland for 12-year-olds, there was a service that was based in Our Lady Children's Hospital in Crumlin, but that service unfortunately collapsed. I have to use that word because it did collapse. I won't go into criticizing anyone at the moment because it's not helpful for this discussion. So there's no service, and then the HSE were using the Gender Identity Development Service, otherwise known as Tavistock, in the UK.
Okay.
Now, but then there was a High Court ruling, which I won't go into, but also there was something that some of us vaguely know, and it's called coronavirus. Came into our lives.
Heard of it, yeah.
Yeah. But that also had an impact because the people from Tavistock could not travel over to do the face-to-face interactions because they had to isolate on that side, isolate on this side, and isolate back on that side again. Yeah. So it was just impossible for them to do the assessments at that time. So that service collapsed, unfortunately. So our waiting list then just got bigger and bigger and bigger for young people. And then when they were timing out, so 17 and 18 years of age, they were going back on the waiting. You there?
Oh,
they were
yep,
going
back
here. They were going back on a waiting list for the adult service, which I'll go into in a few minutes. Okay. So they've waited 2 or 3 years to be seen in the young person service, and then they expected to wait another 3 or 4 years for the adult service. So 7 years of a wait is massively problematic.
Okay.
So where are we now with the 12-year-old? So there's no point in talking about the past, Vanessa. What do we do now? So the GP is key. Okay. I know the HSE are exploring options. They explore the option of employing people, of developing a team, but they can't find a consultant psychiatrist to lead that position, to lead that team at the moment. So that's not very successful so far for them. I think they need to have a bigger net and cast it outside Ireland. That's my personal belief, and I have expressed that. But the HSE are looking for other options. Now, I can't go into this too much because it's something that's very new, and there might be some good news in the next few weeks or so in terms of other options, in terms of that 12-year-old and where they might go to. So it kind of brings me back then to the GP again, that there is, and for the social care worker, that there is potentially a way that you might be able to get around it with a cross-border directive or treatment abroad scheme. Okay. So I think if a social care worker was in that situation and they're working with a 12-year-old, social worker, get in touch with me.
Yeah.
We'll have a conversation. In terms of what, and this is what I would do in gender care, I would look in terms of pathway navigation, in terms of exploring the gender identity, and then having a look and see what option is good for you.
And is part of that pathway possibly, is it still recommended that, so a 12-year-old and it depends, because all 12-year-olds are different, but they might have started puberty, and so their body is changing. Is it still recommended that puberty blockers, which are medications which kind of stop or hit the pause button for your body to go through puberty, are they still recommended? Is that still kind of the best practice idea there?
Yeah, I think just need to come back a little bit away from that puberty blocking aspect of that, or puberty suppression. Because it can really put people's hairs up on the back of their neck. What? Medical intervention? We're blocking puberty for children?
Yep.
And it's not something that's given out lightly.
Yeah.
I think sometimes there's a perception as you bring your child to the GP, and the GP prescribes puberty suppression, and everybody lives happily ever after, which is not necessarily the situation. It's recommended under the International Best Practice Guidelines, WPATS guidelines, that there is a multidisciplinary team, which Ireland doesn't have. There is the multidisciplinary team needs to conduct at least 6 assessments. If there's coexisting issues present, and they need to be controlled or managed before any multidisciplinary team then will give the thumbs up for medical interventions, as in puberty suppression. So, in terms of when just to put this in context, when Tavistock, where the gender service in Tavistock, we're seeing our young people, there was less than half of them young people went on to have medical interventions. So, just to say, not all, and this is an important point to make, because people say, "Oh, once you go to your GP, that you're going to start on these." That's not the case at all. Yeah. It's a prolonged situation over 6 months to a year, where the young person is assessed, and the multidisciplinary team all sits down in the room, think, I think Johnny should go on him, or I don't think Johnny shouldn't go on him. And these conversations are had in a multidisciplinary team, and then a decision is made. And then you are seeing and monitoring that young person when they're on the medical interventions, because if it's something that's not suiting them, if it's something that really it's not feeling right with them, then they can come out with them, and puberty resumes again. Yeah.
So, like, in that, what I hear you saying is that the care of the whole person and the sufficient care of the whole person, like making sure that we have all the multidisciplinary teams in place, that we're working to support families, that we're working to support schools and teachers and coaches and youth workers to know what's the best way to respond, and how can we all work together to support this young person, whether they're 12 or whether they're a little bit older, through a process of not making any massive permanent decisions, but just exploring what might be right for me, and always knowing that if I got to a point where I thought, I don't know if this is right for me, or, I might want to slow this down, that like kind of we can touch the brake pads a little bit and slow things down.
Yeah. But I suppose like sometimes the media or social media can make things even more scarier and put the panic into people.
Yes.
It's like once you have the multidisciplinary team in place, once they are conducting are aligning with international best practice in terms of what other countries are doing, then we're in a safer place, which is what we're not in at the moment. But in that space, then it's where do you find other services that are not based in Ireland? I think that's a key thing to be understanding, that if that young person is 12 and is experiencing that significant gender dysphoria, 12 years of age, coming into the 5 tanners of puberty, that support is there for them. So,
Yeah, that we're doing all of the emotional supports to kind of walk with the person through that. Yeah. And that it's not, geez, what a difference I would imagine for a young person in 2022 compared to a young person in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, living in Ireland, to at least feel like there's a place where I can go and I can talk about this. I can be heard. My parents can be kind of supported along the way to support me. And at least I can talk about this. No hard and fast decisions, but I can talk about it. Now it sounds like Ireland needs to do a little bit better job on resourcing the supports, but we know kind of what we need. Yeah. And then I assume for older people, and I do see we have a question in the chat, and so I do want to get to that because we're moving towards the end. We might stay a speck past 4 o'clock, guys, if that's okay. Older adult people over age 18. Is it the same thing? Go to your GP and the ball gets started there, or is there a different pathway?
I think the GP is always a good place to start. But then again, not all GPs are maybe informed in this. I think, there is guidelines for GPs that I developed with the ICGP over a year ago now. So that's available to all GPs. So if your GP is not aware, they probably need to go back in and get that guideline, because that guideline is there and it's very, very new, and it really shows you in terms of what's available. So you should be able to go to your GP, and then your GP can make a referral. There is a national gender service, which is called the National Gender Service, but they have very long waiting lists. And
is that through the HSE?
That's HSE. It's available in St. Columkille's Hospital in Loughlinstown in County Dublin, which strategically is a bloody nightmare for some people to get to, who are taking public transport. So you have to get from Limerick to Dublin, and then you have to get from Dublin out to St. Columkille's, which is not the easiest of journeys. So, but yes, there is a service, but it has a long waiting list.
Okay, I'm just typing this in the chat just in case we have people among us who just might want to sort of know. And I know, one of the things that you've said and you've been very good about, and we can certainly go to Tenny and to Gosh, which is a local support here, but we could also give you a little email at gendercare.ie. We do have a question. It is a very topical question.
Okay, bye.
You have to go. The phone's ringing. It is. Are you ready?
Yeah.
We said this would come up, and I'm glad to see that. I'm glad to see that it's come up. And thank you to the person who stuck this in the chat. So, hi, Vanessa. I was just interested in participation in sport in relation to transgender women, with particular reference to an article last week by a former female Irish athlete advocating for the exclusion of transgender women. To me, promoting as opposed to preventing is the way forward. Thanks. So I suppose for folks who don't know, Sonia O'Sullivan, who was a silver medal winning runner for Ireland, I think in either the Times or the Examiner, wrote an opinion piece saying that she felt strongly that transgender women should not be allowed to compete in college or Olympic or national women's sports. And I suppose that's really on the back of the swimmer in the United States, Leah Thomas, who identifies as a transgender woman and who won a lot of competitions recently in the NCAA swim events. So, Vanessa, feedback.
I don't think she won a lot of events. I think she won a couple. Maybe,
You're right.
But
You're right.
This was not this was a college event. I think that she won.
Was.
She won. Yeah.
And it was like, I don't know my swimming events, but let's say it was the 500-meter breaststroke. It was a very particular event that she excelled in. She competed in other swimming competitions and did not medal or did not place, but she dominated nationally in this particular one. And there has been a critique of this in worldwide social media about, is this fair? Because this swimmer went through puberty as a male and then transitioned afterwards. It's just so everybody has the background on it.
Very much so, and it seems to be, as much as this is focusing on athletics or sport, a lot of this negativity is focused on transgender women. There's no focus on transgender men being part of sport, but it's focused on transgender women.
Yeah.
Being bigger and stronger. Now, just to say, you know, for people who are not aware, there's already Olympic guidelines for transgender women. So it's not something that we need to look at developing guidelines, because guidelines already exist. And transgender women's testosterone levels need to be at a certain level before they can compete.
Yeah.
Now, a transgender woman has never won an Olympic medal anyway. So because, again, their testosterone levels have to be a certain level before they can compete. So again, there are guidelines that exist.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fear. It's not just fear that is out there in all of society in terms of transgender people. Sometimes you would feel we were the Vikings going back 1,000 years ago, coming into the country. We're a very small population, or a very small community of people. And I think, you know, for transgender women or transgender men or non-binary people, I think sport is essential. You know, sport is essential for your mental well-being, for your physical well-being, for motivating yourself. I mean, there's transgender young people who maybe gender transition at 12 or 13 or 14, and they want to still compete in the sport, but they can't compete in a male category anymore because they're female now. And their testosterone levels are decreased to a level, and their estrogen levels are increased, and they still want to take part in sport. And I suppose what Sonia Sullivan's article is alluding to then, that people in them situations should be stopped playing sport in women's categories, and that's massively problematic. You know, at the same time, I can understand once you're through puberty, as if you're assigned male and you go through a male puberty, that, you know, you are higher, you're more muscular, your bone size is bigger, your arms are longer, and that might give you maybe a better chance maybe in swimming or other events. So maybe that's something that, but I'm sure that's been, I'm not an expert in terms of sporting aspects, but, you know, I can see that, because I'd like to kind of have a balance in things. But, you know, what is this? How can I look into this a little bit more? Where are people coming from in this? And I did read Sonia's article.
Yeah.
And she said herself in it, she's not seeing an awful lot of this, and they're not experiencing enough, and they're not. But this is one case in America. But she said, yeah, we need to get it sorted before it becomes one.
A problem. Yeah.
But does it become a problem?
Yes.
That's the question, really. Is Sonia? It doesn't seem to be a problem. There was one transgender woman who has won a college event in North America. It doesn't seem to be a problem that you get such a big article in the Irish Times. So, you know, I suppose I'd like to sit down with Sonia and have a conversation with her. I mean, like, I remember seeing I used to follow Sonia Sullivan years ago. I used to be really passionate about Ireland winning anything, whether it was tiddlywinks or winning in the 1,500 meters.
Yeah.
And I remember she was beaten by two Chinese athletes who afterwards they found that they had experienced doping, but they still kept their medals, and Sonia lost out on her medals. So I think, you know, that's another aspect outside of that.
That might be, yeah. And I mean, I don't want to, you know, say that I can understand the workings of Sonia's mind or anything, but there is a whiff of kind of moral panic about the whole thing. And again, like I like that image of the Vikings kind of coming in and taking over, and we're gonna, you know, we're going to win everything, and we're going to compete in everything, and we're just going to take away any kind of fairness or opportunity for competition for people. And it doesn't seem to be the case.
No, but that moral panic is very much out there. And whether it's the fear of puberty suppression, which hopefully I've explained.
Yes.
To sport or to transgender women in prisons. Or transgender women going to the bathroom, and, you know, I suppose bringing transgender women going to the bathroom in the context, you know, of sport. If a transgender woman is in a pub or a club and she goes to the women's bathroom, she'd win a record time, because usually transgender women run into the bathroom and run back out. they're terrified of having their voices noticed, their size noticed, and they get into that cubicle, wash their hands, and get out double quick time because they're so anxious. And I think that's a daily life situation for transgender women, where often we and they have to contemplate where the toilets are before they even go to a space. And that's the reality of life for transgender people.
Yeah.
Often.
Yeah. Which, again, I think it's the little things that we don't know are happening on a regular basis for people in their own lives, when they are perceived as different, from other people. Yeah. So how can we make our environments more kind of inclusive or welcoming, or alleviate some of that fear and that pressure?
Yeah, I think it's just transgender topic. The topic, it seems to have so much focus at the moment, and other aspects going back in our history would have had that focus, and maybe post this something else will have the focus. But at this moment in time, I suppose, just to put it into reality of people's lives, is looking at this constant stream of negativity towards transgender people, whether it's sport, whether it's puberty suppression, whether it's women's bathrooms, whether it's whatever it is, that it is putting an obstacle up of somebody coming out, being terrified to come out, and maybe contemplating suicide, rather than making that phone call to a social care worker or to a psychotherapist or an LGBT organization, because of fear of coming out. And this is why I mentioned at the start, that you can overcome this, you can get the support. It's not all negative. Stay away from the noise and focus on your own life. And I think more than anything, if there's one objective that I would have of coming on this talk, is to mention that, stay away from the noise and just live your life and have a very fulfilled life. I listened to feedback from Joe Duffy's Live Line. Someone mentioned to me on the weekend, there was a transgender woman from Kerry on Live Line last week, and my name was mentioned in it. And I haven't heard of her in ages, and it was lovely to hear her talking. Joe gave her ample time, and she spoke about how fulfilled her life was. And I think, that's why I say, stay away from that social media and stuff, then stay away from the negativity, and just, enjoy, I suppose, becoming the authentic person that you are. Okay.
Well, Vanessa, if you're mentioned on Joe Duffy, you have really made it. That is for sure. That is that is better than a PhD. We're just gone past the 4:00 hour, and I know that there are folks who have to go off to other things in their day. If there's any last minute comments or Q&A or anything, you can type it just there in the Q&A chat if anybody has any messages or questions for Vanessa before we leave. I suppose I have a magic wand, just want you to know, and I can grant you, I can't grant you 3 wishes, but I could grant you 2 wishes that you would want people to get out of Pride Week at TUS, particularly around transgender. What are your 2 wishes? What do you really wish magically could happen?
Yeah, I suppose for my number 1 wish would be to ensure that gender identity was a module on each university. That would be my number 1 wish.
All right. Let me write that down for my magic wand list.
Yeah. And maybe there's one on gender identity and sexuality. Maybe they could combine. But I think it would be really good to have that in the module on all universities and colleges. I think that's essential. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And that's that might be something that we can at least try. I mean, we try a little bit in PD, and I know my colleague Karen Suger tries a little bit in sociology as well. But maybe we need to to kind of find a way to put it out there and make it official and give it its own space, not just a little bit of space inside another module. Yeah. Anything else? What else would you wish for us for Pride that we would walk away with for Pride?
Okay, for Pride, I think transgender healthcare should be regionalized. I think we're in 2022. I think healthcare should be regionalized. I believe that we should integrate. We're talking about integrated services. We're talking about sláinte care. I do believe that with integrated services that we should have services in Limerick, we should have services in Cork, we should have services in Galway and Donegal. In the real capital of Ireland, Waterford, we should definitely have have services. But I mean, it makes sense. I mean, the whole idea of integrating services and sláinte care, I think the idea is fantastic. It's a fantastic one, but the reality, unfortunately, is not what we thought it would be. But I do think for transgender healthcare, with the training, I think training is vital to this happening, and this is where the HSE has to take up that mantra and to ensure that training is in there for all their staff, and maybe even going back to social care in the modules, psychiatry in the modules, psychology in the occupational therapy in the modules. We need that to happen to make that dream of regionalized services happen. But I do believe that it will happen in the future, and I do believe then that will take that stigma in terms of trans healthcare out of it. It should be part of all healthcare rather than one specific service in Dublin. So that's
And come here, just to make that point for people here, and you tell me if I'm wrong about this. So if I am a person who identifies as trans and I transition either medically or surgically or both, or there are implications for my health across my lifespan. Am I right? Like there are particular healthcare needs that a trans person needs through until old age. Would that be right?
Yeah, but not something to be shitting bricks over either. I think it's like, oh my God, I need to be going to an endocrinologist for the rest of my life.
Okay.
It's like you like with shared care, you should be able to go back to your GP. I mean, they can monitor your blood. I mean, you get your bloods taken, they send them out to the local hospital. They come back and say, yeah, your cholesterol is too high and maybe your hormones are a little bit too low. Like these are things that can be done by general practitioners. And this would be the future. So it's not like, oh my God, I need to go to the National Gender Service for the rest of my life. Like that's not the case at all. You can have a fully functioning life. It's just different aspect, just to keep an eye on your hormone levels. I mean, like always keep an eye on your mental health. Get out there and enjoy hobbies and enjoy your life. I mean, if you're going to live an authentic life, make the best of it. Get out there and enjoy it. Enjoy every moment to the best of your ability. And it's like that film, that Christmas film. What's his name? Gregory Peck in it. It's a beautiful life. It is a beautiful life.
It's a wonderful life. Yeah. Well,
Or a wonderful life. It's a wonderful life.
Yeah.
So get out and enjoy it. But you should be able to go to your GP and they should be able to monitor it. And, if you need any other care, then you can signpost it, go to a social prescriber if you need if you feel isolated. And it's honestly, Jennifer, transgender healthcare is not rocket science.
Okay. So, and again, it's back to that. Whoops, we lost you again. Where did you go? There you are.
I'm here.
You're there. It's that idea of integrated healthcare, of everybody knowing, like, I have a role to play in this, whether I'm the social worker or the occupational therapist or the teacher or the mom or the dad or the cousin or the sports coach or the social care worker. Like we're all part of this team to support this person. I'm reluctant to say this because it's going to sound like a Kardashian, but like living your best life is really the guideline. Do you know?
Yeah, I think, yes, of course. I mean, like why? I mean, you've gone to all this problems of gender transitioning and you've gone up to that peak of the mountain with the highest points of that. And, enjoy the spin, enjoy the slide down,
Yeah.
enjoy your life. I mean,
Yeah.
that's, if there's any message I'd like to get through, and you mean we levels of ability or disability, and to make the best of what you possibly have. And there's systems out there that will, I suppose, signpost you making the best of your life.
Yeah.
We only have one in this body anyway.
That is what I hear anyway. And enjoy yourself. It's later than you think, like the song says.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 4th years in social care in Moilish. Oh, we're getting lots of praise for you from folks here in the chat. But 4th years in social care in Moilish, could you do a reflective journal entry based on the last hour and about 10 minutes that we've spent together? So kind of what came up for you? What did you learn? What was new? What do you need going forward to really support you in your practice, to support people who are exploring their gender or who identify as transgender? So just a reflective journal entry about our time with Vanessa would be fantastic. Vanessa, we've got lots more comments in the chat. Everybody's really, really happy to see you and to have heard from you. Also, people who are interested in Vanessa's research on ambiguous loss, and folks in social care will recognize that whole concept of ambiguous loss that we talked about last semester. A copy of her wonderful thesis is in the library, so you could go and take a look at that.
When you open it up, there's pop-up pictures in
it. There just about was at the end of it. There just about was. And she took a qualitative approach, guys. So some of you, that will be music to your ears. But I really must say a million times over, thanks, Vanessa, for sharing this with us. Great. This was year 7. We got to go for year 8 next year. And maybe we'll even get you in person, get you over here to talk to our final year students. So thank you for your time. I'm going to stop the recording now.